Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Run It Back, the show where we try to get things right the second time. In today's episode, we're going to be looking forward to Outlaws of Thunder Junction, the set that's going to be releasing here in just a couple of weeks. And today, we're going to be focusing on all of the two-color uncommons, all the signposts that kind of suggest what you should be drafting, what the strategies are going to do, and where we go from here. As I took a look at the spoiler, I noticed one thing, that each color pair not only has a signpost uncommon, they also have a legendary creature at uncommon as well. So both, we're going to go over both the signpost and the legendary creature, which are kind of another signpost as well, just to kind of give you an idea of what each of the two color pairs are going to be doing in draft and what you should be focusing on as we move forward. Starting off with blue-white, we have the Wrangler of the Damned, a 5-mana creature human soldier with flash. And of course, at the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, create a 2/2 white spirit creature token with flying. So now, this is obviously a plot card that works really well. Even though this card does not have plot, you plot your other things while this is on the battlefield, and you get your triggers while then next turn being able to cast those cards with plot while also still being able to trigger this thing. So in theory, you don't really want to be casting cards from your hand. Also, with flash, you can maybe pick off like a 3/1 or a 2/1 or something like that. But overall, I think you're mainly just trying to end up getting your 2/2s onto the battlefield as best you can. Looking at the legend for blue-white, we see Gem Lightfoot, who is a 4-mana flying vigilance, and at the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, draw a card. So obviously these two cards work very well together, right? So you want to have, really as many of the Wrangler of the Damned as you can sort of handle in your deck, while also Gem Lightfoot's out there drawing you cards that you can end up in theory plotting out as well. Notably, you cannot plot the card that Gem draws you because you can only plot as a sorcery, so there's no way that you can do that. But even if you play more of a draw-go style and not really a whole lot of plot with counter spells, bounce spells, those sorts of things, that works really well, so you're not casting spells on your turn from your hand. Moving on to white-black, we see Ruthless Lawbringer, a 3-mana vampire assassin. And when the Ruthless Lawbringer enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, destroy target online permanent. I think this is really good, particularly with all of the mercenary tokens that are out and around. White has ways to make these 1/1s with a tap ability, and so you can sacrifice those pretty easily. Seeing Baron Bertram Greywater, we can see a 4-mana 3/4, which is a good stat line right away. A Vampire Noble, so not an outlaw. And whenever one or more tokens enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 Black Vampire Rogue token with lifelink. So that is an outlaw. Then, of course, 2 mana, sacrifice a creature or artifact, draw a card. So this is a great card advantage engine. It also, generates mercenaries. So if you're playing things more in the red-black strategy that has mercenaries that matter, or white-red, as mercenaries matter there as well, this is a good way to make those mercenaries by creating other tokens, which are all over the battlefield. So it's something that black-white seems to be leaning into is making tokens, sacrificing tokens, and generally sacrificing for advantage. Seeing here in red-white, we have our first non-creature spell. This is a Form of Posse, is X red-white sorcery. Create X 1/1 red mercenary creature tokens with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. These mercenary tokens are going to be plenty available for all kinds of things, and I think they play really particularly well. If you need a go-wide strategy, now you've got a bunch of 1/1s. But if you need a go-tall strategy, you tap all of them except for one, targeting the same creature, and now the one mercenary goes in as a 3/1 or a 5/1 or a 10/1 or whatever, depending on how many mercenaries you have. So you don't necessarily have to put them all into danger while still being able to trade off with some big threats, but you have to do it on the attack, because obviously pumping only as a sorcery means that you're not be able to block that way. As we move on to our red-white legendary creature, we've got Eartha Joe Frontier Mentor, is a 4-mana 2/4 that when Eartha Joe Frontier Mentor enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token. And whenever you activate an ability that targets a creature or player, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. Now, this is extremely powerful. Obviously, with the mercenary that comes in, she can attack as a 4/4 on the very next turn just by activating the mercenary targeting herself. And then, of course, if you have multiple mercenaries, things go pretty nuts there. But the other key is that there's a couple of different opportunities in white for these white enchantments that remove creatures. I'm thinking Leyline Binding from the bonus sheet. There's also a couple other ones within the set, and those, if you're targeting, creatures or players, of course, triggers, those get doubled up and you can choose new targets. So therefore you can start picking off two things. So any other crimes that you can commit with triggered abilities, thinking like the deserts as well, now deal 2 damage instead of 1 damage. All these things start to add up. In green-white, we have a Congregation Gryph, a 1 green-white Hippogriff mount as a 1/4 with flying and lifelink, and whenever Congregation attacks while saddled, it gets +X/+X, where X is the number of mounts you control. So obviously this is your mount colors, saddle colors. This is somebody who cares about having lots of mounts while also needing to be saddled. Notably, mounts can saddle each other. So if you have 2 mounts and one of them isn't going to attack, but this one might, then you can saddle the first one with this, or vice versa. And that really sort of lets you get in the air with lifelink for 3, 4, 5 damage. So this card is going to be tough to race. I don't think there's going to be too many things that have a whole lot with it, but it does need saddle 3, which is a bit restrictive. So you're going to need to tap down a creature with power 3 or greater, or excuse me, any number of creatures with total power 3 or more. And that's a lot, right? You need 3 mercenary tokens or something similar to really sort of turn this thing on. But the payoff is definitely there if you've got the mounts to do it. Miriam Herd Whisperer, 2 mana for a 3/2. As long as it's your turn, vehicles and mounts you control have hexproof, and when a mount or vehicle you control attacks, put a 1/1 counter on it. This is great. This is particularly good for the mounts and vehicles that aren't going to be crewed, right, or saddled, right? So that way you can still continue to get value out of your mounts, even if they're not saddled. But as a 2 mana 3/2, she saddles just about all of the mounts. There's, I think, 1 saddle 4 that I saw, but she pretty much does everything on her own. So Miriam is definitely going to be really important for your mount deck, as well as I guess the Congregation Gryph is more of a nice to have and definitely a powerful card, but this Miriam Herd Whisperer definitely seems like it's what you want to be doing. In blue-black, we see Intimidation Campaign. Whenever Intimidation Campaign enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life, and you draw a card. Whenever you commit a crime, you may return Intimidation Campaign to its owner's hand. I think that committing a crime here is pretty simple to do, especially in blue-black, where you're going to be bouncing your opponent's things, killing your opponent's things with black spells, Thoughtseize, you've got your deserts. There's all kinds of little things that can really do this. So this is pretty easy to buy back, but it is slow, right? 1 damage, gain a life, draw a card. It's not very impactful the first time around. Shoot, it's not that great the second time around, but if you're going to end up drawing the game out pretty long, this thing will win you the game. Like, it will draw you enough cards, it will drain enough life, like, things will be good for you. So I'm not going to pack up too many of these things in my deck because 3 mana is a lot for this effect, but I don't mind having 1, maybe a second in the deck if we've got lots and lots and lots of crime. As our legendary blue-black creature, we see Lazav, Familiar Stranger, a 3 mana 1/4 shapeshifter. When you commit a crime, put a 1/1 counter on Lazav. Then you may exile a card from a graveyard. If a creature card was exiled, you can have Lazav become a copy of that card until end of turn, only once per turn. So I think one of the keys here is that we've seen Lazav a couple of times, and they're, a good copier, right? They exile cards from graveyards, and they sort of take on that thing. But one of the keys here is when you commit a crime, put a 1/1 counter on Lazav, then do that, right? So a 3 mana 1/4 is great, but a 3 mana 2/5 is incredible. So all you have to do is commit 1 crime, never have it copied, anything, and then this is already a stellar card. And then once you're able to copy a flyer, copy something else, like it just turns into something that could be better. But the baseline for this card is very, very good at uncommon. So as we can see here, between Intimidation Campaign and the Zav, blue-black is more so about crime value. In blue-red, we see another non-creature spell. We see Slick Sequence, which is a 2 mana instant. Slick Sequence deals 2 damage to any target. If you cast another spell this turn, draw a card. So 2 mana, 2 damage, draw a card is very strong, and being able to cast 2 spells in a turn seems relatively easy here. Unfortunately, this card cannot be plotted, so it doesn't really play well in the blue-white deck unless you're going to be playing cards on your opponent's turn. The other thing is you have 2 or 3 Slick Sequences in hand. You're going to have to end up using one for no value to make sure you get the value out of the other ones. So you're definitely going to need some other spells to sort of start this off. But as far as like a gunslinger strategy with casting lots and lots of spells in a turn, this thing definitely is going to play really well after that very first spell. Crom, Violent Cacophony is a 4 mana 2/3 flyer, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a 1/1 counter on Crom and draw a card. at rate, without anything else to enable this card is not really very good. A 4-mana 2/3 doesn't feel good at all. However, if you can end up making a turn where you play this card and then you have a card plotted from the turn before or something similar where you're able to get that value right away, this card is perfectly fine at rate. 4-mana 3/4 that draws a card and has flying is exactly where I want to be, but you just need to do a little bit of extra work in order to make sure that you can end up using that on this turn, right? So right away, I'm a little down, a little low on Crom. So blue-red is going to be based on casting 2 spells per turn. Moving on into blue-green, we're going to see Make Your Own Luck, which is a 5-mana sorcery. You may look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may exile a non-land card from among them. If you do, it becomes plotted. Put the rest into your hand. So a 5-mana draw 3 with a little bit of a bonus on some mana, but you have to wait the next turn. This card is very good, but it's very expensive, right? So you're going to need to end up playing a late game with lots of blockers and things to deal with your opponent's oncoming onslaught right away. But if you end up playing all of your 1/1 1-for-1 removal and end up taking care of all of your opponent's creatures, and you need to regas on something, this thing is great. This thing is very, very good. We just need to make sure that you're spending most of your turn pretty much casting this card until you're on turn 8 with 7 mana and you draw a land or something similar. This card is not going to do a whole lot for your tempo, but it will do really well for your card advantage. Taking a look at Doc Arlock, Grizzled Genius. It's a 2-mana 2/3, and spells you cast from your graveyard or exile cost 2 less to cast. Plotting cards from your hand cost 2 less to cast. This seems very powerful to me as a really good blue-green early drop. A 2/3 is very powerful. It blocks a lot of different things in the format so far that aren't saddled, right? So maybe this has trouble with more green-white. But also the spells you cast from your graveyard or exile, not very, very important for us here, but plotting cards from your hand costing 2 less is a really big deal. Big mana saver on a very reasonable body. Moving on to red-black, we see at knife point, this 3-mana enchantment says, as long as it's your turn, outlaws you control have first strike. Whenever you commit a crime, create an outlaw, right? So that way, this works really well with the mercenary tokens. So that way you can end up jumping up 1 or 2 big ones, and then that it has first strike, or you've got 10 1/1 first strikers on the battlefield. That definitely plays really well on your turn. But notably, this is an aggressive deck. You cannot really block with this card. It doesn't really do anything on your opponent's turn. With the exception of committing crimes on your opponent's turn, does give you a surprise blocker if you so need it. File Smasher Gleeful Grenadier is a 2-mana 3/2, and it says whenever another outlaw enters the battlefield under your control, File Smasher Gleeful Grenadier deals 1 damage to a target opponent. Officially, this card is just a good 2-mana 3/2. It plays really well with saddle cards. It plays just really well on its own, attacking in as a mercenary. Notably, it's an outlaw itself, so any of the Outlaws Matter cards work with it. But more than importantly, this just plays so well with some of your make a bunch of 1/1 mercenary tokens. I expect this card to play well, mainly just because it's a 2-mana 3/2. Taking a look at our green-black cards, we see Badlands Revival is a 5-mana sorcery. Return up to 1 target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and return up to 1 target permanent card from your graveyard to hand. So this can be a reanimate and a raise deck. I expect this to be powerful, particularly in green, which seems to have a lot of big fat creatures around. So I really do like this, but I would be a little strugglesome just to make sure that we're making sure that this 5-mana card is impacting the battlefield enough. Our green-black legendary creature is Honest Rutstein, a 3-mana or 3/2, and when Honest Rutstein enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to hand. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. We've seen a couple different 3/2s in green or red or black, and they all look very, very good. They work really well with saddle, and this sort of strategy looks really good. The other key to this is this just curves into a 5-drop on 4, which is very powerful, or a 6-drop on 5, which is very powerful. You're just going to want to likely make sure you're getting value out of that Gravedigger style effect where you're returning target creature card from your graveyard to hand. So obviously a 3-mana 3/2 that helps you ramp is good, but I think the main power comes from here, maybe having on turn 5, you have a 3-drop that traded off, you play this card, you can then play the 3-drop back again, and the following turn you're still holding up removal spell while continuing to deploy threats and just making everything cheaper. Last but not least, we are looking at green-red, and we see Cactus Folk Sure Shot is a 4-mana 4/4 with reach and ward 2, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, other creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain trample and haste until end of turn. This may be the most powerful creature I think we've seen, and the biggest statted creature, which kind of makes sense in red-green, and red-green cares about creatures with power 4 or greater. So being able to end up casting some of your big sandworms, some of your big cactus things or whatever, and then continuing to attack in with trample and haste on the same turn is huge. A 4-mana 4/4 with reach and ward 2 does not die very easily. I think there's a couple things in the format that obviously deal with it efficiently, but outside of that, you know, taxing your opponent's mana for 2, blocking things in the air, this thing is going to be a house, and red-green beats definitely seem like it's on the menu. Jolene Plundering Pugilist is our very last card to look at today, and we've got a 3-mana 4/2 Mercenary, and whenever you attack with one or more creatures with power 4 or greater, create a treasure token. And then you can also sacrifice 2 mana and a treasure token on top of that for Jolene Plundering Pugilist to deal 1 damage to any target. So this plays really well as a crime. This plays really well with splashing colors, obviously creating those treasures you can utilize. Alternatively, you know, just attacking with 4 power creatures, whether it's Jolene herself, a mount, or something else, then you continue to end up creating those treasures, and after you build them all up, you can eventually just continue to sacrifice them down, throwing them at your opponent's face, committing crimes in the process, gaining all kinds of different value. I expect this card to be a good sort of niche part of a lot of well-tuned decks. It fixes, it commits crimes, it deals damage, it's 4/2 for 3 mana. In general, this thing just seems like it's got enough things going for it where I want to play a 3-mana 4/2 when a lot of the times I may or may not. Thank you so much for sticking with me through all of these cards. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned a thing or two. I know I'm very excited to play with a lot of these cards at my local game store and, of course, on Magic Arena as soon as they drop there. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you in the next one. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.